Hi again. So today we're going to begin working on basically creating the forms for our city. And we're going to do that. I'm going to show a couple of different ways that you can go about doing that. I'm going to start with the easiest way, which is to do it in 3D, and then I'm going to go to the most difficult way, which would be in Photoshop. But I'm going to show both because different people have different hardware and different software, and people have different work processes. There's no one right way to get to a good perspective city scene. Um, but certainly there are tools that will make things easy for you. So I'm going to begin with a couple of quick 3D demos. We're not going to go all the way into all the buildings, but I'm going to do just a few demos to sort of show you kind of what I'm thinking. If you're not using 3D software and you'd like to see how I work in Photoshop, just scrub forward in the video until you get to that part. All right, so just to open up here, we're in 3D Studio Max. This is just software that I'm most familiar with, but you certainly don't have to use Max. All of the things that I'm going to show in here today, as long as you understand simple navigation and how to manipulate primitive forms using move and rotate, you can probably find your way around in your software and sort of figure out how to do what I'm doing in Max in the software of your particular choice. So let's go ahead and get started. So obviously, when you're creating buildings, one thing that I think is really helpful before you do anything else, let's do. I'm just going to make sort of a box, and I'm going to put it in my scene. I'm going to make the length 2, the width 2, and the height 6. And this is going to be just a representation of a human figure. That way, I know that everything else that happens in my scene is going to be, approximately the right height. If I'm a little worried and I don't quite know where the head is or something, you can fudge it a little bit and just drop a little sphere in there, and then I'm just going to go ahead and group these together. Right there we go. Okay, so how do you create buildings? Pretty easy. Pretty helpful if you just know where box, sphere, cylinder is. Right, you can drop a box in here, make something that's about building size, and then there's your building. Now that's obviously just a floor, and it's really not very interesting, right? We've just got a box, right? So what I would recommend doing is sort of approaching the 3D stuff two different ways. Or rather, when you create 3D buildings, create basically a few different things. So one is maybe a box that sort of shows you where your building is going to be. The next thing that you should do, I'm just copying that over. I'm going to scale this way down. Let's call this sort of my floor. And then I might take this, I'm going to put it, where's my guy here? We'll say he's 6 feet tall. So let's take another, about like that, and that should be roughly where your first floor is going to sit. What would you do? I mean, you can fill up this area if you want with just a simple primitive. Here's a box. And really kind of what you want to do, if this is your approach, because you don't have to worry so much about things like perspective and making sure that your perspective is right. I mean, start worrying about just the architecture. I'm going to convert this into an editable poly, and then I'm going to just take these sides and manipulate them. Right. So so make sure that you're worried about the architecture. Just make sure that your architecture is kind of interesting looking, right? So I could do something like this. Actually, let me turn my snap on here. And for today's assignment, really all we want to do is we just want to get the basic forms in. We don't have to have everything totally perfect, exactly where it needs to be. Okay, so I might make things like the door frame. It's really just kind of essential that you know how to get the geometry, simple geometry, and kind of just move it into place, right? I might want to move this over this way, convert to editable poly, and you can sort of see how this stuff works. Now the cool thing about working in 3D is that if I get out of object mode here, I can grab all of this stuff and I can just pull it down, and there's store to, and if I want I can take some of these other things and I can use them as little pillars to go in between sections of the window. And then once I have that, I can do that again. Maybe I want to make a double door frame. Just move that over. Take this section, move it over here, right? So all this stuff doesn't have to be, totally perfect. You're just sort of framing everything in, right? Then if I want to do a second floor, all right, I know that my floors are going to be, let's just get rid of this. We don't need this anymore. Once we get our floors in, we know that how we can make sure that our floors are the same size. We'll select both of those and we'll just sort of crane it up. Now you might say, oh no, you're doing disastrous things with your geometry. This isn't good modeling practice. No, it's not good modeling practice, but it actually doesn't need to be, right? Because really what we're doing is we're just doing concept art, right? Eventually a 3D modeler would look at this and sort of interpret it in a way that would make a little bit more sense, right? So maybe I want to make an extra floor that goes on top of that. I can maybe do that later. Another thing that I can do is I can make things like windows, right? So again, things might pop out just a little bit here. Now I've got this all set to auto grid, but again, look at your software, see what's going to work best. And also pay attention to things like windows. Windows aren't always a neat box. Sometimes they have ledges to them here. And the type of window that I'm making here isn't necessarily the same type of window that every single building has. Some buildings have very different arrangements, to their windows. Some of them have different spacers that sort of go underneath them, something like this. Right, but again, you can just group all of that. Don't want to do that. I meant to move it, not scale it. Right, and you can move it off to the side, make as many copies as you want. Right, and also again, make sure that you're checking your architecture, because sometimes there's spaces in these buildings. It's not just a solid block of windows that goes all the way across. So give your audience a place for the eyes to rest. Make yourself a spot so that if you want to create, a pillar here, or you want to have maybe a sign that comes out, in these different areas, that you can do it. But you can see really just how quickly you can block out buildings, right? And like once you have a floor, you've got you don't have one floor. You've got as many floors as you want. We'll make this 6, and then you've got pretty much a whole building in just a matter of a couple of minutes. All right, so that's one way that you can approach this. Another type of 3D software that you could use is something like Google Sketchup. This is Google Sketchup. One of the nice things about Google Sketchup is that it already has a guy attached to it. Make sure if you're using this, you're just doing personal use, not professional use. But sometimes people in games do actually use Google Sketchup. So the neat thing about this is that you can just sort of draw with your pencil here. Any sort of polygon you want. You hit the extrude, and you can just pull that object up. You can pull that object out in any direction that you happen to be interested in. You can also create divisions like this, and then you can pull just those out. So again, it's the same sort of thing. Like you can see how very simple it would be to create a building using software like this. Very, very straightforward. And again, your process would be the same. Again, with this, the only big difference I would say between SketchUp and other modeling software, other than it's maybe a little easier to use, and is that because it is so easy to use, there are some things that it doesn't have. Like it doesn't have a renderer, so you would need to make sure that you take a screenshot, and this would be something that you would need to actually pull into Photoshop, and you would need to draw over it and make sure that you got all of your lines just right. All right, speaking of Photoshop, let's jump into that for just a moment, and we'll explore a couple of things. So as you recall, we had all these sketches here. So I've chosen one piece that I liked from Google Earth, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of draw over it. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that you keep your lines rigid and straight, and you also want to make sure when you're doing this in Photoshop that you're not capturing all the detail, right? You want to capture just enough that you get all the interesting parts of just like where the geometry is, but don't worry about the details, because the details are things that you can fill in later, and you want to make them your own. You don't want to just copy off of a photograph. So for this particular case, what I might do is just go with the AAA drawer, which is 10 points wide. I'm going to reduce that significantly to maybe 3 points. And I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to make sure that my scene, I'm going to reduce the opacity of it considerably. I'm going to reduce it to maybe 15%. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in, and if you remember from earlier, one of the things that we can do is we can click for a point, and then we can click for a point. And if you hold the Shift key down in between those 2 points, right, that'll take your point all the way to wherever you want it to be, right? So click, Shift, click. Click, Shift, click. Click, Shift, click. Right? And you can sort of figure out where all of your lines are at. You're just going to want to make sure that you're being very precise, right? If you need to get in nice and close, take a look at where you're at. Again, with like windows, there's no need. Remember, we're going to be doing stuff with these windows. We're going to be making them photorealistic. And part of that is going to be actually taking actual photo textures and applying them, to what you see. So there's no need to really get into any major detail in these windows. Just kind of block in where they're at, right? If you want to do the same type of stonework, you might put little markers where all the stones begin, something like that. And you would just go through however much of the scene you want to make sure that you keep. Again, don't worry about people, don't worry about signage. All of that stuff will be taken care of later. But it's really just a question of getting in nice and close and just clicking your way through this. Hold Shift, click, hold Shift, release. Click, hold Shift, release. or you can just click your way through it. Like if you have a window frame, click, just hold shift down. I'm continuing to hold shift, right? And there's my window. So that is another way that you can approach doing line work in Photoshop. Now I'm going to show you one other way, which is maybe the hardest of them, but can sometimes yield really good results if you have a really good idea. One thing that I would maybe consider doing is if you go into your class brushes, there's a 1-point perspective brush. And if you click that, you'll see that it is quite large. I'm going to size it up even a little bit more on a new layer. I'm just going to click right there. And then what you can do with this is, perhaps widen it out, and you can pick where you want that perspective to start. You could also potentially, grab a section of it. Maybe you want to widen out, maybe this area, let's say. And you can take that and pull that off. So that would be one way that you could work with this. Sorry to jump out of there for just a moment. Again, so you can just grab part of this if you want, do Control T, and you could actually just pull this out over to the side, and you could get a different, sort of distort some of these lines a little bit, and get kind of a perspective that you might like a little bit more. Just move it out of the frame, right? Grab it, Control T, and pull it out to wherever you want, right? And you would use this just like you would any other perspective grid at this point, right? So, remember to switch your brush over to like AAA drawer, and sort of decide how big you want your wall to be, decide how big you want your character to be. How many floors is this? Say 1, 2, 3, something like that. So you would really kind of want to start with something as simple as this. Now, what do you do about the building? Well, the way that actually I would consider doing these buildings, if you know that something's going to be 3 floors, make yourself a human character again, make a new layer. What I like to do actually, I'll begin with symmetry. I'll pull up my symmetry stuff, and then what I can do is just like we were doing before, sort of clicking through. I'm just using my shift key to get nice straight lines. I might want this up a little bit higher. Yeah, something like that. Now you're going to just sort of start plotting where you want things, and you can basically build whatever you want, right? Like, so say I want to make a window. I want it to maybe look a bit like this. That's fine. So now I have a window. I can even be a little fancier with it if I want. I can do something like that. Okay, let's do a new layer. Let's say I want a door. I could do something like this. If that looks a little small, maybe I'll put that guy right there. Then I might do something like a window, like a shop window, something like this. Okay. All right. So what do I have here? Why did I do all that? Well, let's take our symmetry and turn it off for just a moment. Okay, I can do the same sort of thing that I did in 3D and 2D. In this particular case, we want to make sure that, let's get rid of that. We don't need that. Okay, so now I can just take my shop sections, let's say, and I can move my door over here. I can control click, shift drag, and move that section over. I can double up on the doors over here, move my shop section over again. So pretty straightforward. Windows, I can just put right wherever I want. Right? Say I want them only over the shop windows. Right? I could do something like that. Ah. No! That's what auto select does to you, right? So if I grab those two, and these two, and these two, carefully, I can drag them up. And now I have the whole like facade of the side of the building. So the neat thing is, once I have all of that stuff, right, there's my whole side of the building. Now let's bring up the rest of this. I can take the whole building and I can go Edit, Transform, Distort, and I can distort it along this path. And then presumably everything will line up about right. And I can say that that looks all right. This might look a little bit small. I might actually pull this up a little bit. Something like that. That looks a little bit better in terms of scale, right? And by the way, you don't just have to do this with, you don't have to only worry about doing this sort of thing with just a building. If you wanted, you could build out the entire street line, right? And then take the entire street line and put it into perspective using this same method, right? So, so give that a try. Build out some windows, build out some doors, build out some different ideas for different floors, arrange them in sort of just kind of a flat, 2D way. I mean, maybe here's building 1 and go ahead and arrange it out. And here's building 2 and it's maybe a little bit smaller and there's an alley in between. Building 3 builds off of that. You can have all sorts of like weird shapes if you wanted to your structures. Obviously, you want to try and keep them somewhat reined in, but just like applying textures to different sides of 3D architecture, this is the sort of thing that you're doing, right? You're just designing one side at a time. So you would design this side of the building and all of the other buildings at the same time, and then you would transform them. You would then design what this side of the building would look like, and you would set it up so that all of the floors match, right? So when you set up those second floors, let's say you have floor 1, 2, and 3, you would want to make for like, and you go, okay, so this guy is the same as this guy. So if I want to do this guy, I would set up on a flat layer, on an orthographic layer, I would set up another layer, and then I would design all of the windows and the shops and the doors if I wanted any on that side. Or maybe on that side I didn't want any door, maybe I want like a little service store in the back and a billboard, something like that. I can apply that as well. So that's really all there is to it with this. So what I'd like you to do is just sort of start off your line work and get it to a point where you think you've got a really good feel for something, and then from there we'll build off and we'll do flats, and then work on our lighting, and then put any other finishing touches we want on before we move on to our final project for the course. But just start with your line work first and see if you can get it to look right. Thanks for watching.